Shabbat Shalom. This is Avi Lipkin with our second Parashat Shavua, which is the second reading of the Torah that I'm doing these YouTubes on. Last week we spoke about Miketz, at the end of 2 years, which is the story of Joseph when he was in prison, and the butler told Pharaoh about this wondrous dream, foretelling dreams prophet by name of Joseph, and Pharaoh had these dreams about the 7 cows being devoured by another 7 ugly cows, and 7 beautiful sheaves of wheat being devoured by ugly sheaves of wheat. And so Joseph was pulled out of the pit, and Joseph told Pharaoh that this meant that there would be 7 years of great prosperity and then 7 years of terrible famine. And he showed such wisdom, such deep understanding, that Pharaoh appointed Joseph to be basically his prime minister, and to take all the steps needed to save Egypt from what was going to become a very disastrous drought of 7 years. A drought that was probably going to destroy most of the world at that time. Joseph, of course, afterwards is really first ruler in Egypt under Pharaoh. Don't forget, he was first ruler in the jail, under the jailkeeper. He was first ruler under Potiphar, in Potiphar's house. It seems like wherever Joseph went, he was a blessing to the people with whom he was in contact at that time. Now, last week, the message was primarily about sibling rivalries. And I spoke basically about how Ishmael detested Isaac, that Midian detested Isaac, the other son, who we will be seeing later in this book about Mecca. The first book, this one, talks about the book of Genesis, and so these books actually are going to start merging now, this week, next week, into the book of Exodus, which is in 2 weeks from now. This week's reading, we see that after the second year of famine, the family of Joseph, his brothers, who hated him so much, come down looking for food, because the drought was horrible, and they did not know that Joseph was still alive, and they came down to Egypt to buy food. And Joseph is in his royal dress, with his royal pharaonic hat. Probably he has makeup on, with his very, very impressive clothing that Pharaoh provided for him. And when Joseph hears that his brothers have come down to Egypt to buy food, he immediately goes to see them. It's just they don't recognize him. Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. So Joseph starts to interrogate them. Why have you come to Egypt? Well, it's clear, obviously. The answer is, we've come to buy food. We're starving. And Joseph looks at them and says, no, you are spies. You have come to the land of Egypt to spy us out and then to conquer us. There was always this fear, this schizophrenia, this paranoia, this xenophobia of foreigners in Egypt. And it's unbelievable. You know, I'm married to an Egyptian woman, Jewish Egyptian woman, and for 45 years we've been together. There used to be a time when there were these Egyptian movies, these classical Egyptian Hollywood type movies, and we would watch them every Friday night. This is before I became religious. And I learned some very interesting things, that even to this day, the Egyptian people are very proud. Egypt is known as the mother of all the world. Egypt was the greatest country on earth during Pharaoh. And 4,000 years later, the Egyptians have not forgotten this. Even when I speak to Arabic-speaking Israelis, or Palestinians, or Jordanians, or from wherever, they all say, Masr Ad-Dunya. Masr Ad-Dunya means Egypt is the mother of the world. And they were always afraid of being conquered. And Egypt was conquered a few times by different groups. They were conquered, for example, by the Hittites. They were conquered by the Babylonians. They were conquered by the Assyrians. And they were also conquered by Ethiopians. And in this book, in my 6th book, Return to Mecca, I talk about how Moses actually, we're going to talk about this in a few weeks, Moses actually leads an Egyptian army into Africa, the heart of Africa, to defeat this Ethiopian Sudanese army that has conquered Egypt. They circumvent these African soldiers and defeat them in an ambush, and then they take the city in the heart of Africa. This is something most Jews and Christians don't know about. It is referred to in Josephus. It is referred to in Sefer HaYashar, or as the American Christians would say, Jasher, the book of Jasher. It's also in Yalkut Shimoni, which is in the Midrash. So we see here a very interesting history of a great power known as Egypt, surrounded by many, many countries which envied Egypt. Just as the brothers of Joseph envied Joseph. All these countries around Egypt, they envied Egypt. And to this day, Egypt is, or at least it was until recently, the envy of the Arab world. So Joseph interrogates them. And, you know, it's very interesting when one goes to a Jewish synagogue and listens to the rabbis. And the rabbis are wondering, why is Joseph so cruel to his brothers? Why is he interrogating them so harshly? Why does he make them leave Shimon, as basically a hostage? They say, we'll give you all you need, but you're going to leave one of your brothers here. And meanwhile, the brothers still are suffering under the pain of the memory that they sacrificed Joseph. They didn't know he was still alive. They thought he was dead. And the father, Jacob, father of Joseph, was constantly in mourning for his favorite son. His favorite son was envied by the other brothers, and they really wanted him dead because of the jealousy and the envy. And we spoke about this in last week's sermon, last week's teaching. So Joseph gives them plenty of food to take back to their father Jacob, but they have to leave as a hostage in jail Shimon. And then when they come back, it turns out that Joseph says, now I want Benjamin. Who's Benjamin? Benjamin is the full-blooded brother of Joseph. And finally, it's a very, very passionate story of how Joseph finally surrenders to his love and his compassion for his brothers, and he becomes public with them and tells them who he is. And he says to them, don't worry, you know I should kill you. You, for all intents and purposes, you killed me. I should really kill you, but you know what? I love you, and God sent me here to Egypt for life and not for death. And after 20 years in a strange country, Egypt was a strange country for Joseph. He did not want to be in Egypt. He wanted to be with his father in Canaan. But God had other plans, and God sent Joseph down to Egypt for life. And so in this week's reading, Vayigash means, and Judah approached Joseph to beg with him not to be so tough on them. This is before Joseph revealed himself to them. And I think that one of the important stories here, that it's not really a happy story, but you know, some people have said in the Jewish world that the term socialism and a big government, something Americans don't like to hear about so much, comes out of this weekly reading, because as the 7 years of famine continued, eventually they sold all their livestock to Pharaoh to be fed by Pharaoh, by Joseph. And then after they sold everything they owned, they sold themselves as slaves. The Egyptians sold themselves as slaves to Pharaoh and to Joseph in order to be fed. But the important thing is that the Egyptians did not die from the famine. The Egyptians stayed alive. And so there are many people, of course, today in modern democratic Western world who say it's not a good thing that, you know, people should be in slavery. Judaism is very much against slavery. But this idea of a big government and a socialist government, many Jews say emanates from the story of Joseph. I will say, though, and I do agree with the government needing to keep the welfare of the people as its first priority. And so if there is a famine, or if there is a lack of water, then you provide food for your people. You provide water for your people, and you do everything you can to save your people from death. These are some of the messages that our Holy Torah teaches us on how to relate brothers between brothers, and of course citizens of the country towards other citizens, including foreigners. We should love the foreigner who has come into our midst. And of course, as Israelis, we do love the Palestinians, we do love the Arabs, and it's very important to stress the Palestinians with whom we are trying to negotiate peace are hated viciously by their Arab and Muslim brethren. The only people on the face of the earth that love the Palestinians are the Jews of Israel. We live with them, we work with them, we eat and drink with them, and we have family occasions with them. Of course, their leadership is dominated by this hateful ideology of Islam, but the Palestinian people themselves, 85% of them, presumably it seems, have Jewish genes in them, and they were forced to convert to Islam over the last few hundred years. A lot of Palestinians know that they're Jewish, but they're too afraid to express anything about it. So therefore, we must love the Palestinians. We must try to bring them back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, deliver them out of the slavery system of Islam, and bring them to their freedom. In the coming weeks, we're going to talk about slavery in Egypt. We're going to talk about the scourge of slavery in Africa, the scourge of slavery as it spread into the Western world, and then, of course, the freedom of the slaves. These are all things that go all the way back 4,000 years to the Torah readings of Egypt. And God bless all of you, and Shabbat Shalom.